As sustainability becomes prioritized to slow the detrimental effects of climate change, many solutions have arisen from biotech innovations, and a lot of those innovations are happening here in Los Angeles. Marina and Raquel are on the consulting team here at BCLA, and they recently completed an internal consulting project on the market mapping of sustainability companies in Los Angeles. You can find the report on pages 14 and 15 in the digital booklet. So with that, we would like to introduce panel one speakers. We have Jim Cooper, who is the CTO and managing partner at Braid Theory, a blue tech accelerator in San Pedro. We have Gabriel Levesque-Tremblay, who is the CTO and co-founder of food tech startup Orbillion Bio. And we also have Andy Navarrete, who is a postdoctoral researcher at the USC Wrigley Institute for Environmental Sciences. And this panel will be moderated by Arye Lipman, who is a general partner at MarsBio. Thank you.
Thanks, Callie. Great work, appreciate it. Hi everybody, my name's Ari. Like Callie said, general partner at MarsBio, which is a seed stage venture fund here in LA focused on biotech. Really excited to talk to the panel today. Thank you all for being here. Let's just do a quick survey of the room to kind of set the context. So is there anyone in the audience who's an undergrad? Any undergrads? Okay, wow, 1 out of 100 and whatever, okay. How about grad students? Okay, now we're talking. Dang, all right. Good job, guys. Thanks for coming. Anybody in academia who's not in one of those categories? Professors or postdocs? Okay, a few of you. Industry? Okay, yeah, kind of the remainder of folks. And who just came for the food? Anybody? Yep, good, yep, thought so. Yep, looks like it, yeah, not surprised, okay. All right, great, so that gives a little context for you guys today. It's a lot of grad students and a lot of industry folks as well. So maybe let's just start with kind of a general question to talk about your current position and your journey to that position. Maybe we can talk to you first, Jim, about how you started this project that you're working on. How'd you get over here from the land down under?
I swam. No, seriously. So I started after I was working for government for quite a while. I started a consulting company around market research. That kind of got a little waylaid, and people asked me to be entrepreneur in residence at various incubators and accelerators, and finally I kind of settled on the ocean space and figured that might be a good area. I was entrepreneur in residence at Biotech LA, which is kind of a now defunct accelerator and incubator. Also in San Pedro, that hotbed of innovation, as everyone well knows, right? And when that went defunct, we, a couple of us from Biotech decided, well, it's much more than just ports. There's fisheries, there's aquaculture, there's even drug discovery from the ocean. And I thought that's pretty exciting, given that I'm a biologist and everything. So we formed an accelerator. First of all, we kind of started off at being a consulting kind of venture advisory, and then have slowly moved towards now we have a synthetic biology lab and having some fun. Fantastic. Which you still haven't come down to visit.
Yeah.
So
I will be there. I will be there. San Pedro, folks. It's not that far away. So yeah, Gabriel, tell us more. I realized we didn't really introduce your company, so maybe you can introduce Orbillion to the group.
So I'm probably the only person to speak French in the company, so usually they call it Orbillion, but you can say Orbillion. Yeah. We are basically a biotech company who specifically produce cell culture meat, so cultivated meat. There's tons of different words. The FDA has not yet decided on the final name, but we basically take a small biopsy of an animal, we regrow, we make those cells feel very happy, and then we regrow them in the lab. And we use bioprocessing techniques, just usual bioprocessing technique that we use in therapeutics to basically grow a massive amount of cells. And then we sell this as meat, But as you are able to develop those technology, you can imagine that eventually you can produce a very large muscle that could be realized in regenerative engineering and other things. At the end of the day, we are a biotech company, so we first focus on producing meat. And I think...
How did you get there? How does one become a lab-grown meat scientist?
Interesting, yeah. I think I did many years of school, and I ended up in my last postdoc at UC Berkeley, but I think unlike most of my colleagues who were doing the postdocs or grad school, I really just never wanted to be a PI or a professor at university. So I was utilizing my knowledge, and I knew that I had another objective. So I took a position at the American Institute for Chemical Engineering, where for years I was the director on Wall Street in New York City, traveling around and doing a lot of, overseeing a lot of science that was happening. And I think that allowed me to see the mega trends and what was really happening in science. So when you have a very broad overview and you take a step back and you look at people working on various different fields, you can see some technology that seems to pertain to so many different fields of science. And so I found a few technology I was interested in, we licensed it, et cetera. And these were very applicable to the cultivated meat industry. So I left this position to just focus completely on the startup. I think that's really just my road trip.
Very nice. And yeah, how about you, Andy? Tell us more about the projects you've been working on affiliated with USC.
Right. So the project I'm working on now is it's a collaboration between a company, Marine Bioenergy, and USC. And basically, Marine Bioenergy got funding from the Department of Energy to try to figure out a way, could we farm seaweed in the open ocean as a biofuel feedstock, basically. It has a lot of advantages because you don't need any land, so it's not competing with food. You don't need fertilizer, all those sorts of things. So the company, though, is basically, their expertise is in engineering. They didn't really have any biologists, so they partnered with USC to actually, they're building kind of the test equipment, and we're actually running the experiments in terms of like how well is the seaweed growing. And it turns out that if you provide the right conditions, basically plenty of nutrients, the seaweed grows really well. So we feel like that piece of things has come along, and now there's all sorts of bigger challenges in terms of how do you actually scale this, and it's pretty difficult to grow things in the ocean. So that's kind of where things are at.
Great, yeah. I think what's interesting about this panel, things have changed a lot in the biotech industry over the last 5 or 10 years. I think traditionally people think of biotech as kind of exclusively the domain of healthcare and biopharma. So those were the products that came out in the 90s and early 2000s, and now we're starting to explore all these new applications of biotech, which is really exciting, including for climate and sustainability. So, these three gentlemen all have kind of different stories about how biology can be applied to meet some sustainable goals, which I think is really interesting, and it opens up a lot of kind of job prospects or interesting new avenues for people to explore. So, Gabriel, maybe can you tell us more about why animal agriculture or the meat industry is kind of such an important one to try to tackle for climate or sustainability?
Well, yeah, I can say it simply. If you, animal poop, and they do a lot of other things that eventually do a lot more harm in the atmosphere because it produces carbon dioxide, et cetera. So we all know the story. There's this, but there's also taking a lot more land. So right now what's happening is that there is more and more countries around the world that have higher and richer protein-based food in their diet, and unfortunately that means taking more land to grow a cow. A cow takes about 5 to 7 years to be mature, unless you want to eat veal, for example, which is much younger cattle. But growing a piece of meat takes tremendous amount of water and space, which means you need to cut the trees to grow grass, and then your beef will eat grass, etc. So you can imagine that if you can do the same in a lab, you can probably produce the equivalent of a cow of meat within a month. That's a big difference between years and months. And then you can do this within a facility. So this saves a lot of the land, especially. Will it save energy? I'm just totally being honest. Probably not at first, but eventually it will. like any technology, will develop and be more efficient.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And Jim, how about you? Just thinking about the ocean space, what in particular are you excited about, kind of in sustainability in the ocean? Kind of what kinds of projects get you
Just
excited?
on sustainability, or do you want me
Climate,
to say anything
sustainability,
that,
or other
all right.
projects?
Other
yeah.
projects. Okay, so I also like the idea of like cultivated meat, so things like fish proteins that we can grow in a lab. That would be fantastic. But I'm also interested very much in things like biofuels and how they impact. And I think Andy actually didn't say the whole story about the marine bioenergy, the elevators and stuff. That's actually a really big part of the story, and how we can utilize various parts of engineering. What I'm really excited about the most is that blue tech, or the blue economy, if you want to call it that, or ocean science, ocean tech, is very cross-disciplinary. It has a little bit of biology, or actually usually a bit of biology, a lot of engineering. These are typically very large projects, so they require a lot of infrastructure and a lot of funding. That funding is, a lot of it comes from kind of undiluted sources. There's this very large gap of funding in that kind of very early stage, so angel and seed investment. And there's not a lot of specialists. There are not a lot of marine hubs around the world, surprisingly so. And so the things that I find really exciting that I really want to work on is synthetic biology applications that we can either use in the water or we can kind of drag out. So anything from drug discovery, phages, we've spoken about phages before. Those kinds of things are very exciting to me, but also materials, things that we can utilise to enhance or mitigate actually ship drag. So things like hydrophilic coatings, things like that. Those things are favourable to me. And as we start looking at decarbonisation, particularly around shipping, and we've got this massive problem off the coast of California now with lots and lots of supply chain issues. About 30% of the supply chain is cold chain, so reducing our reliance on the cold chain by applying biological solutions to shelf stability would actually be probably really good, because that would be good for both drugs and for food. So.
Yeah, fantastic. So now let's go to Andy. Pass the mic down. So Andy, you've been working primarily so far on kelp, giant kelp out in the ocean, and yeah, we mentioned this elevator a little bit. I can expand on that. So Andy's on this team that built an elevator in the ocean that brings kelp up to the surface to absorb light during the day and down into the lower reaches of the ocean to absorb more nutrients at night. So it's a totally wild thing, very challenging building something like that at sea. But more broadly, just thinking about kind of kelp and algae and biofuels, I mean, Andy, are there other areas of kind of climate and sustainability where you think this stuff is more applicable or more interesting beyond this, the fuels application?
Yeah, well, I think the fuels application is a long way off, right? I mean, it's just, you need a lot of anything to make it into fuel in a kind of way that makes sense. And kind of where I see more opportunity in the seaweed route to get there, or maybe just where it ends, I'm not sure what will happen, is in materials and in proteins and in all sorts of things. Because basically, like, kind of like what we were talking about, right now a huge source of input into all the kinds of things we use in the world, for instance, is like fish meal and stuff like that, or petroleum that goes into plastics. And there's all these like unsustainable kind of base resources that we're using up too quickly. And so where I see like the most opportunity for seaweed is how can we actually have a renewable source material for these things. So could you grow a bunch of seaweed and use the protein from that seaweed as an input to either your lab-grown meat or your fish that you're growing or whatever, instead of having to just catch more and more fish every year? Or could you use some portion of the seaweed to make biodegradable packaging, something like that? I think there's a lot of opportunity there in terms of turning something sustainable into a raw material.
Yeah, great.
And there are some advantages and there's some advantages with seaweed too, that you can kind of co-locate other organisms too. So things like mussels, abalone, things like that. So you've got there an extra supply of protein, and I think that that's a really important way of looking at how we can utilise this space out in the ocean to cultivate more than just the seaweed itself.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great topic. You know, the topic of aquaculture, which is basically farming at sea or farming in the ocean. And yeah, the U.S. is quite behind in aquaculture. There's a lot of countries around the world that are very invested in it. I'm curious, Jim, to get your thoughts. You know, how do we try to grow that here? Why are we so kind of behind in aquaculture? Complicated.
Do you want me to tell you I'll tell you the 30,000 foot level.
Yeah.
I think primarily the issue is regulatory, but not solely regulatory. I think there's a huge concentration in the US of scientists that are dedicated to healthcare and where it's kind of sexy and where there's lots of money and lots of cash, right? So that's all fun and everything, but also people need to be fed. So you're not going to have healthy people if they're not fed the right kinds of things, and protein is one of those things. And we're in a growing deficit of protein. So we need to kind of regroup and think about what are how we kind of cultivate. Sorry, pardon the pun. How we kind of cultivate a kind of a pedagogy across all of the disciplines to understand that there is this link between our wellness and the wellness of the environment and how we can reduce our impact on climate change. So I think that those are the two main issues. And regulatory in particular, we've got the California Coastal Commission here, which regulates things that go in and out of the ocean, and particularly from the permitting process for growing aquaculture off the California coast. It's not as though it won't happen, it's just going to take a little bit of time. And I think that once we have that well established here in California, I think that there will be a lot of funding that will go to it, and then you'll see that we'll dominate the world. So I think we've got a very rich resource, and it's just underutilized. Yeah.
Since we're talking about kind of regulatory and government intervention and so on, maybe Gabriel, we can move to you and talk about what is the regulatory environment for lab-grown meat? Is it a whole big giant question mark?
How can I say this? Regulatory is always an issue. So I mean, we're working on this. There's a new alliance with what they call is the top 10 company that comes together, and then it's based in DC, and it's helping us with this issue. But I think it has been already approved in Singapore. So Singapore obviously is a small land. They don't have any agriculture. So they export most of their protein and meat. So they were the first one to approve. There is, we see it in especially these small areas, which I like to call the islands, which they really need to import most of their proteins. We see that they are much more willing to approve it quickly. So there's other places you can think in the Middle East that are similar, and I don't want to name them because I don't know when they will be approved in the regulatory. But in the States, fortunately or unfortunately, it will be regulated with the FDA. That's pretty much ending like this between the FDA and the USDA. But it will be, although it's non-GMO for many of the companies, it will be regulated as if it was a GMO. So it will be the same regulatory pathway, at least from what we know. Obviously, everything can change. And that's a priority, I would say, because everyone is ready for production. So, I mean, at this point, I think the U.S. market is probably one of the most attractive for everyone.
Yeah, that's interesting that it's going to be regulated by the FDA rather than the USDA, which I guess traditionally regulates food products, right? So it's being regulated more like a drug or something like that. That's interesting. Yeah. I mean, in that space, I think that is kind of the big concern is how do these things reach scale, and with regards to lab-grown meat, I mean, what about the animal agriculture industry? Do you see them kind of standing in the way of this at all in terms of, the beef industry has, I would think, significant lobbying power. So do you see any challenges out there going up against big beef?
Very good question. To be honest, I was raised on a farm, so I'm totally understanding of this. Honestly, when I think about this, when you go to the grocery, do you really want to eat the same meat from the same, are you really making it a point every time you go to the grocery and say, I really want my meat from Cargill, So I personally think that sometimes you will want to eat plant-based, sometimes you are going to eat cultivated meat, and some other time you want to eat something else. I think at the end, it's all about the craft and how delicious it is. And personally, that's how I think about food, right? Is it delicious? Is it healthy? If yes, I would try it. Do I want to eat it every day, every lunch? No. So that's my perspective. I think that the food and the meat industry should not see this and will not see this as an enemy, because if you look at the curve, people are eating more and more meat, yet there is not more and more land to grow your meat, and the meat price will increase. Also, the meat, just want to say, is highly subsidized in terms of the costs. You're not necessarily paying what it costs to produce it. So you really have to think about, we may just take that segment, right, this area in the market that is the ever-growing need for more proteins as the population increases and as people eat more meat. So we may just, curve that and be like, we're going to be flat. We're not necessarily going to increase agriculture meat, but we definitely will have more alternative. I like to see this way. We're not an enemy. Mm-hmm. And at least in our company, we have a very integrated approach where farmers are actually part of the story. So, if you have to take a biopsy from an animal, this animal won't die, they're small biopsies, mm-hmm. Then you will always need more genetics and more cows. So someone has to have those cows. So I call this the farmer, right? So that's how I see it.
Yeah, that makes sense. So Andy, let's go to you and I'm going to shift gears a little bit. I guess let's kind of talk about why LA, we're all here in this city, and it's maybe not traditionally known as a biotech hub, but this is kind of part of this movement and this physical space we're in, all that kind of stuff. So maybe Andy, if you want to expand on a little bit, like what you see as the value of this region and how kind of that could apply to climate or sustainability, or why are you here,
Yeah, well, I was talking about this a little earlier with Arye, but I think just where I see like so much of an opportunity for sustainability in LA is that there's just so many different industries here and companies that are like operating profitably. They're established, in oil and gas, in manufacturing, in textiles, in food, that already have like a real business model. And I think the opportunity here, which hopefully people are going to take more and more advantage of, is to like make a sustainable alternative and find a way to like offer it to these companies in a way that makes sense in their business. And that here there's just, so much opportunity to like actually find out what's a need for businesses and like where can you provide value to them that is also sustainable. So I think that's something that like, in the Bay Area, that's like the technology hub, but there's not that kind of base of different other industries up there.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to frame it. I mean, we have a lot of very polluting and non-sustainable industries that are here in LA. So, whether it's the fashion industry with textiles, like you said, energy, I mean, anyone who's driven through kind of South Bay can just see the massive refineries down there still very active. Obviously we have a lot of tastemakers in terms of food and stuff like that. So maybe Gabriel, you can talk more about why'd you guys set up a lab in LA? I think you're probably the only lab-grown meat company in LA. So
we are.
Yeah.
But we're not necessarily. But anyway.
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think we are in LA because of me, and that's just because my partner didn't want to move to San Francisco, and all my co-founders were there. But we also had a collaboration here, so I think the university is very strong. There's a lot of talent here, and I think I really quickly realized that this is a really good area to find talent, because if there's not so much competition, then there's also, it's attractive for others to join your company. Versus in San Francisco, company that works in the same field, I mean, I think in Berkeley there's about like 20. Mm-hmm. So, there's plenty of other places to work too. If you want to work in that field here, you can join a company as well, that's fine. But I think that in LA, and other thing that I found that was very attractive now that I take a step back, is that you really have to see what is your local force. So for me, I need to work with chef, and I need to work with, there might be some celebrities that would be interested in this field. So, television is very strong here, so you have access to all those chefs, all those people. So I think, you find the strength locally, and that's one of them is literally the other industry, not your industry, and then take advantage of this.
Yeah, we keep coming to back. Yeah, Jim, you'll be next. We keep coming back to that kind of like multidisciplinary theme. Talking earlier about, well, how do you kind of carve out a skill set for yourself in your career? And pretty much everybody here is maybe starting out in biotechnology or with a biology degree, but then kind of applying that in new ways. So I feel like that's just going to become more and more important to be successful in any career that's related to science, as well. Maybe you have this biology knowledge, but now you're applying it in food or in aquaculture or in energy or, and so on and so forth. And I think that's one thing that LA has, is that kind of multidisciplinary feeling. So yeah, Jim, how about you in terms of, why LA or Southern California is kind of a focus for ocean tech or blue tech?
Well, we're on the coast. I mean, that's an obvious one, right? But I think, I was just being flippant, sorry. But I think that we've got a real opportunity to shape the biotech ecosystem here in Los Angeles in our own vision. Everyone says, "Oh, we've got to be like Boston. We've got to have, we've got to have a Weiss Center. We have to have a George Church lab here, or we've got to do something like that." We don't actually. I think everyone's pretty talented in their own way here, and I mean in this room. So and we're doing some amazing things, I think. So we've got a real opportunity to actually project ourselves as being kind of where the multidisciplinary, cross-disciplinary set of biotech resides. So I think that we have if we continue that kind of a vision, I think we'll succeed. If we kind of think to ourselves, well, we want to be like Berkeley, or we want to be like Boston, or we want to be like somewhere else, I think we're going to stagnate, and we're going to not have this kind of view of our own selves. Where do we want to be when we grow up? Well, I'd certainly like people to gravitate towards the ocean, obviously, but I know that's not realistic. I think the idea of having not just lab-grown meat, but lab-grown fuels, I think is a great idea. The idea of having bioreactors filled with algae, creating biofuels is a really good one. I think that we can then shape the way that we transition from fossil fuels into a decarbonised future. So that would be ideal for me. So having healthcare is just like then would be a really good a good addition to the ecosystem where there might be more healthcare related companies in the Bostons and the San Franciscos.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. So maybe we'll just do kind of a round of more, I guess maybe advice related questions, or just at least one. So we'll start with you, Jim. I mean, if you were going to give yourself as kind of an undergrad some advice about charting a career path in biotech or in sustainability.
Don't do biotech.
Okay, don't do. Well, watch out, there's a lot of biotech people here. That's what you tell yourself. I mean, yeah. What kind of advice would you? We have a lot of grad students here. They're probably trying to figure out what comes next. They don't want to, necessarily be professors. So, any advice?
You do at least one entrepreneurial class. If you're an undergraduate, definitely do a management class or a business class or entrepreneurship or something like that. That would be good because we get to see a lot of slide decks from founders who are scientists, and then we have to spend 100 hours fixing up the slide decks. So that's that kind of understanding of the economics of what people are doing in their biological field, I think would be good. So that would be my first point of advice. The second point of advice, I think I would, and it doesn't, you don't need to get an MBA or anything. Just do some classes in entrepreneurship and some economics. That would be good. The other thing is that I see a lot of people who get PhDs who are not interested in really being in the lab or being a PI. Going into venture, I think that we need more scientists in venture. Honestly, we really do, because how is venture going to understand some of these big and complex problems that we're going to try and solve, like decarbonisation or mitigating climate change? So those are the things that I would say. So if you're an undergraduate and you're thinking about getting a graduate degree, sure, go off and get a graduate degree, but think of some of those things like venture capital and other areas.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how about you, Gabriel? Advice for folks just starting out in their careers?
Totally. My best advice is for cell biologists, come work at Orbillion. Because we have 16 open positions right now, so that's my best advice. No, seriously, I think just choose your own path. I mean, just don't listen to everyone around you. I think there's such a negativity sometimes when you're at university. I don't think I was ever listening to this, but I've heard so many people, I'm going to be stuck there, it's so hard. I'm like, you did such a hard degree, you will find a job. That's the one thing I tell you, you will work for the rest of your life. There's no issue there. So don't listen to people around you. I say, if you know you want to go in academia, if you can do it, you can succeed. If you know you want a company, just consider listening to what your heart is telling you, and create your own path. Don't listen to others is number one. The second thing is there's nothing wrong while you're a student right now to communicate with people and say, hey, I would love an informal interview. So-and-so, I'm inspired by what you're doing, but that's not exactly what I want to do. I mean, just connect with people, do your networking right now. I mean,
Don't wait.
Don't wait.
Yeah,
Don't
you don't
wait
need to wait
last
until you
minute.
graduate or
Yeah.
achieve some milestone before you talk to people.
Job shadow someone or
Mhm.
get a coffee with us.
Yeah, come visit the lab and I take you for coffee. We can talk more, you know what I mean? That's fine. And I'm sure a lot of people here will do the same.
Yeah. How about you, Andy? I know you haven't left academia yet, but
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I would 100% agree with what they're saying of start thinking about your next move while you're still in grad school if you can. You don't want to graduate and just be like, oh, what's next? And don't ask me how I know. But the other thing I would say is, I've been thinking a lot just about how you can apply biology to like sustainability, and to me the kind of biggest keys are like it has to be something that's scalable if you're going to make a real difference. There's greenwashing, and then there's like this can actually make a difference in the world, and if it's going to make a difference in the world, it has to be something that actually like can scale up to just be really big. And then the other aspect is it has to like provide some kind of value on its own, beyond like this is cool and like sounds sustainable or whatever. Like, to really take off, I think things are just gonna have to actually be better in some way than what exists already, from a functional standpoint. So I think that the types of things that fall into those boxes, and I don't quite know what they are exactly yet, but that's going to be the stuff that's going to make a real difference in the world. And I think, just to put that in your head, basically.
Yeah, that's a great point. Gabriel, did you want to add anything to that, or? Yeah.
There's one last thing I wanted to add that I think it's so funny that I wish I knew is at the end of the day, if you have a degree on XYZ, right, you finish with your degree, you are equal to anyone who finished with this degree, right? So you will have to fight during your interview to show what else you have. All those other little things that you have around, I think, I wish I knew that before. They're so important for when you're going to look for a job, because if you did this on the side and it was not with your institution, it would look like it's outside of your degree. So that little extra mile that you do while you're studying is actually really impactful after when you're looking for a job.
Yeah, that's a great point. Yeah, extracurriculars. So we're kind of early on Q&A, but let's move in that direction anyway, because I think that'll be fun, and we'd love to see a lot of questions.